Right, I think if we are on 12, we are 12:30, so good afternoon and thank you everybody for joining us on a slightly different time, a different day of the week and a different time, but you're very, very welcome. I'm delighted to be accompanied by two very well respected and esteemed industry colleagues, namely Simon Wilson from Stonehawk and Dan Darwin as well, who's affiliated with Stonehawk. The aim of today is to start thinking about the return to work. So we're going to be thinking about, we anticipate, hopefully within guidelines, we can, as a retail business, be going back to work at about 2.5 weeks, beginning of June. So for any sort of customer facing or any business where we're working together, it's going to be thinking about what we need to do to be prepared. So for those of you that don't know me, Helen Dimmick, an industry consultant, but I'm, as I say, honoured to work with Simon and Daniel as well. Both of whom, personally and professionally, I have so many reasons to respect what they are doing, and we'll talk about that a bit later. So we aim today, we'll talk through security, first of all, with Simon. We're going to move on then to mental health awareness and management with Dan. And thank you so much for we've been quite overwhelmed with the amount of feedback and questions that we've had on this. I think the floodgates are about to open, and my goodness, is this timely to start having these conversations. But without further ado, let me hand over to Simon. Simon, would you like to introduce yourself?
Morning, everyone. Hope you're all well, and thank you for accommodating us in your schedule today. Really appreciate it. I think important to say a massive thank you to Helen, first of all, for organising this. She's done some splendid webinars and created a wonderful audience. Some of you may have seen several of them already. I think it's clear to say that Stonehawk and Dan, myself, are here to support you at this time. This is something we feel we need to do for the industry. We've got knowledge, expertise and exposure to aspects that maybe are not on your mind at the moment, but are important to flag up, hopefully by the end of the session today. Please fire in your questions as you go along. Hopefully by the end of the session today, you'll have some takeaways that you can apply to your business or to yourself that will be valuable, and for us, that's what it's all about. Stonehawk itself, you probably know, is a armed robbery prevention training company. So we are suspended at the moment. We're not doing any training, no stores are open, but a very important part of our training is the trauma, the loss of staff from the industry after a serious incident. And it's completely understandable, but there are things we can do as a business and individuals to empower ourselves and our teams and our staff to be stronger against this. Just a quick resume on the training. So we would take you from 2 or 3 weeks ahead of the training. We bespoke the training to your business operation, and then we would come in and over 4 hours take you from the moment you open the store and all the way through to the time you close. Obviously what to do in the event of an incident, and certainly what to do with many practices you have during the day to make you stronger and to push away crime. You may have read the bullet points on the screen. So I spent 15 years with the Met, continued to work with high-end brands nationally against armed robbery and security since. I have also put together a really strong team now. There's a couple of others behind the scenes, but I brought down to the forefront today because of the topic of mental health. And I've been sitting listening all these last 6-7 weeks on all the Zooms, the webinars, to understand what your issues are at this time. So I know you've got an awful lot on your plate. I know everybody wants to get back to business, and we all want to know what the new normal will be. Can we go to the next slide, Helen, please?
Yeah. And then we're introducing Dan now. So Dan, if you just take a moment to tell us a little bit about you, because we may not have met you before.
No, good morning, everyone, or afternoon now. So I was a police officer for 12 years, had a lot of experience in that. Basically, during the course of my career, I ended up suffering with post-traumatic stress disorder, along with depression and anxiety. That presented its own issues within a big organisation. So I learned how to deal with mental health and the stigmas that come with it and the challenges that come with it from being in a large organisation, having suffering myself. It changed my view. I had a life incident where I attempted suicide in March 2018, which again changed how I viewed mental health and the awareness that needed to be built around it. So I left the police after 12 years, requalified as a trainer, also as a mental health first aider, and I am very passionate about getting the mental health awareness message out to workplaces, to anybody that I can reach, really, not just workplaces, anybody, because anybody that's suffering with mental health issues, and it's not a nice time. So anything I can do to help those people was always going to be my mission when I left the police. So I use a lot of my experiences from being in the police, and things that I've witnessed. I use a lot of my experiences from my personal life to help support as many people as I can. And I want to take this as wide as I can take it, and be as proactive as I can with it, and give as much support to people as I can.
That's great, Dan. And so Dan, as you can probably tell, is really passionate about the subject and has so much to tell us. So Dan knows we've only got an hour, but we will be packing in as much information in this as possible. So first of all, over to Simon.
Okay, thanks again, Helen. Well done, Dan, and welcome to the chat. Really proud to have you on board at this important time, Dan. I touched on a little bit earlier, so empowerment of full staff teams is key to Stonehawk. We want to make you all stronger together to drive away crime from the industry. We have seen some shocking figures in recent years. Last year, we were pleased to see a change in the figures and a reduction, and I can put that down to a cumulative approach from police, from brands, from staff, from training companies, of course, and our resilience as an industry is getting stronger. So there is a positive message, but also alongside that, in the coming times, I really want to get the word vigilance into your head, please. We really need to keep on revisiting that to make sure that we are being vigilant at all times. It's not a time to relax in the industry on the back of good figures last year. Continue as we are, keep doing the good work, and I think we all speak and listen to each other a lot more than we ever have done due to this lockdown and all the webinars and Zoom chats we've had. So it's very, very important to be confident in what you're doing. I've learned, obviously, confidence gives you great growth and ability in your sales and your sales techniques and your design techniques. So I really want to bring security to the front of your mind for a few minutes, but then let's build a strength where we put it to the back, because we're all comfortable in the understanding and the unison between us on how we approach everything. Can we go one on, please, Helen?
Yeah.
Thank you. It's a shame, but the intelligence is increasing that there will be a potential rise of armed robberies after the lockdown ends. Again, links back to our vigilance. We were very good before we closed, as in the retailers. When I say we need to return back to that vigilance, but with some added extras on top. We don't know where these potential armed robberies are going to take place, but if you can imagine, there's a number of criminals who were unable to adapt to all the fraud and online matters that we've seen during lockdown. They will only do fast-moving, violent robberies and thefts. So they will be wanting to get their lost earnings, as they tell us. So we're going to be vulnerable, I would imagine, as you build your structure around how do you reopen. There's some really important things to take into consideration. So I would imagine a number of people are going to open with fewer staff due to the furloughing and not wanting to go straight back to a full wage bill because of lost revenue in the last 6-7 weeks. Social distancing is going to be a very interesting one, how you work that within your store. That's obviously going to be a requirement of you, looking at the government documents that have been released today. And you need to be prepared, obviously, for potentially unannounced visits by health and safety, but also to make sure your staff are happy at all times with what you're doing. There is going to be an acceptance of people with masks on. From my aspect, not looking at the virus aspect, I'm looking at the security aspect now. That is a real concern. The new normal will involve masks. I wear a mask when I go out to do the shopping. It is almost expected of us, and it looks strange when somebody is not. From this aspect, there will be criminals considering combining that potentially with a peaked hat, combining that with glasses, basically concealing their identity. And there's a very strong suggestion made on the CIVJO webinar a couple of weeks ago that some countries will strongly ask that the customers remove their mask and show their faces to their CCTV camera. From my background, that's a great idea. We like that. Safer Gems will like that for those of you that are familiar with it, because we can get the visibility on the person's face. But I understand that would be an incredibly uncomfortable thing to do. That is for you to make a decision on. I think there is obviously, at the point that the mask is removed, there are also there's a risk of obviously the virus being spread. So think about that one. Add it in if you can. It is only a suggestion. I know it's uncomfortable, but I've heard it being said, and other places are trying to do that. So it could be really, really useful. We've seen a reduction of focus of crime last year. Safer Gems is a good indicator for the criminal activity each year. And they have written very clearly that we've got a switch from watches to jewellery. I have always thought that the watches, the Rolex concessions, have always been the highest and most desirable for the smash and grab, the armed robbery gangs. Their potential for robbing or stealing or getting men's Rolex these days has been significantly reduced. We've all worked very hard to focus on what the desired brand and the desired watch that the criminals wanted. So the security has increased around that. My understanding now is that they've adjusted their focus. So they're going to be coming towards jewellery a lot more. Could you please sort of take that into your considerations when you're planning your store? And maybe we have always expected Rolex to be or Rolex concession to be the focus. We're seeing a change in dynamics now. So I mentioned earlier with the Stonehawk course, it's very, very relevant, and a couple of things we really focus on. The opening and closing of stores is incredibly important. That's your high risk time. And in fact, you will have requirements, many of you, by your insurance company on how you do this. A webinar I was just on, or a Zoom meeting, sorry, just before this, was saying that one person went to collect something from the store the other day, but had to get someone else to meet them because their rules are that they have 2 people open the store. It's really important that you have a dialogue with your insurance company. You will be going back to a changed operating system. You will be having fewer staff. You may be having a locked door that when you never had it, one-way systems. There could be many, many different aspects, but please communicate this with your insurance company just so they can have an input. They know where you're at, what you're doing, because obviously if we do see the rise in crime, then what we don't want is for your insurance company to be as crafty as some can be and not as honest as many of them are, and say that, well, I'm sorry, we've got a loophole here, you're not covered. So really think how to get this across to your staff, explain how you're wanting to run your store now, how we think we can do things better, how can we open and close with fewer numbers, how do we work the store with fewer staff in the store, do we limit the numbers of customers coming in so the ratio of staff to customers is much more comfortable. We're hoping that there'll be a stampede towards your door when we reopen, but I think we need to take things gradually if we can. Can you open for shorter hours? Appointment only, as I say, would be great. But also, how do you manage your staff? You've got fewer members of staff. The criminals could be watching and waiting just for that 1 or 2 people to go on their break, and then all of a sudden you would have a weakened jewellers that the criminals would be looking out for. If you have high value stock, very difficult to do this, I understand, with the layout and having been into many jewellers, but maybe you could move your high value stock away to a safer area behind the counter, or there's a dynamic you could consider there. Just give the whole place a real think through. I know, Helen, you did this recently. You went in and you stood in the branch in the store, and you literally considered how to lay out the store to adjust to the COVID-19, but also the security risks.
Yeah, very much so. I mean, sorry, just to interject. I mean, it's funny, you think you're a retail expert, you think you know your store, but thanks to this checklist and working together, myself and my partner Phil Ainsworth, who has Ainsworth Jewellers, we've realised there were potentially some loopholes. So we're going to, the stock is all in the strong room at the moment, but we're not going to put as much stock in the window. We have the security team coming back, we're upgrading 2 of the cameras, we're putting a buzzer on the door. But it was really useful just to go through this and just to think through every, like you say, the customer journey linked in with the sales professionals journey. One other thing I did just wanted to say actually was at the very beginning was how important this process is. Personally, I've been the victim of an armed raid when I was in London, and I have to tell you, it was one of the most frightening things I've ever been through. And this preventative action will safeguard your staff, because I know every business owner would not want that to happen to their business. But then the other thing was, when I was at Green & Benz, we were a victim of a targeted, or the intelligence came through that we were a victim of a target potentially. And we worked very closely with the police. And by putting these procedures in place and improving our practice, the incident never took place. And I think it was very much that we were showing to do the right thing. So yeah, I love this advice. And if you think, you know, you can always learn more details. So sorry, Simon, you were talking about more planning preparation.
Thanks, Helen. It's always nice to make it real, although obviously we've already discussed, I didn't like hearing that you had to go through that. I put on there source and purchase appropriate PPE. I think that's a huge conversation that a lot of you will be having separately, but I think the customer experience is very, very changed. And I mentioned earlier in a meeting that very much as a consumer myself, I will be looking for retailers to be extremely responsible around the virus. So don't be don't feel too uncomfortable being the same way yourselves. So plan for the worst and be ready for all scenarios and rehearse situations. For that, you're going to potentially have fewer staff. You may have a completely different operating way with a locked door, reduced numbers in your store, but maybe take a few minutes to Zoom call, ideally pick up the phone, speak to your members of staff before they come back and just refresh their memories, make sure everyone's on the same page. Because as soon as you hit the ground running, you've got the store open, hopefully the business will kick off and you'll be selling and making money again. But just get everybody ready. We used to say rehearse, rehearse, rehearse in the way that we'd have walkthrough and talk-throughs in the store, but that's not possible at the moment. But, you know, 5 minutes before you unlock the doors in the morning, just to say, is everybody ready? Does everybody understand what the code words are or the code phrases? Different aspects there, it's really, really useful. And also, it's a bit ghastly, but I'm worried, especially with stores with lower numbers. But if somebody comes into the store and does have the symptoms of COVID-19, we'll have the contact tracing app, and potentially we could have a situation where all staff in that store on that day might have to self-isolate. How do you then have a strategy in place to bring in other staff to keep the store open? Our contact tracing app that we're all going to have apparently is very much a case you might hear. You know, 2 days ago, somebody that was in your store shown from the contact tracing app that they are now seriously ill in hospital. You would have to consider what to do with your store and your staff at that time. So maybe phasing people back in if you're able to do that, having a backup strategy would be really, really useful. So when you're stood in your store and it's closed before you're opening, and maybe just a couple of things to prompt you some ideas. There's a lot more, but I've just put a few on these slides for Helen. So obviously check all your lighting's working, switch everything on as if it's a working day, the CCTV, make sure the time and date, are correct on the CCTV. Your security fog or smoke systems have got a nice green light on it, and they're not reporting any errors. And if you have the synthetic DNA sprays, smart water, etc., they're important. Make sure they're all working. Doors and cabinet locks are in working order. So just do a bit of an MOT of your premises. You won't have used your panic fobs if you carry them with you for a while, so is it worth putting new batteries in them, making sure they're charged if they're rechargeable? Do you reduce stock in the window and the cabinets that are accessible to the public just until you build a full staff team, that full resilience of the operation that you would run before the COVID-19 pandemic? I've touched on retrained staff on the keywords and phrases. I think that's really important because you can just get them to switch on by saying something completely unobvious to the criminal, but something would mean everybody to the work, something to everybody in the working team. All of a sudden would be like a set of meerkats paying attention to what could be going on in the store. And point out the location of the security cameras. I've mentioned that with removing the mask aspect, but it's really, really important that you will be moving your store around, but don't put yourself or something in front of a security camera. It's a huge consideration. Many times we see it where people have got wonderful CCTV, would have got a great facial shot of the criminal or criminals, but unfortunately there was something in the way that day. So really, really important to focus on the basics like that, but the prep before you open your doors to the public.
That's great, Simon. And I think one of the things that Simon and I have also discussed is, as I say, we'll revisit this in a couple of weeks, but one of the things as a business owner that we used to think about was also merchandise presentation standards. So when you are taking the stock out, to bring out, just revise that, maybe reduce those. So maybe think about some of the conversations. I know I used to repeatedly tell my staff, if anything happened, nothing was more precious than their life. I wasn't interested in the stock could go. So we don't want any heroes. Nothing is more precious than the life of your staff member. So I think later on down the line, Simon, I think we're going to look at a little bit more, aren't we, in detail of what that working practice looks like. But again, think of that dialogue a little bit more. Thank you, Simon. I'm going to move on to. Oh, I'm so sorry, Simon. There's another slide. I'm so sorry. We're talking about what happens in the event of an incident. So please, because there's nothing better than rehearsing for it to prevent it.
You did a great job there, Helen. Don't worry, not a problem at all. Helen's exactly right. I mean, the core of the training is very much to protect staff, reduce injuries, and also to protect business owners, that they're giving clear guidance to their staff how to react. Very easy to sit and say and do whilst we're all here, most of us sat in our own homes with a cup of tea or a glass of water. But in the heat of the moment, it's very, very hard. But we need to develop a template of reaction rather to hopefully stand in front of the emotional reaction. And so if the worst does happen, create distance, put your hands up. They don't need to be right above your head. You can just put them nice and clearly. Without giving any words, that says an awful lot to the criminal of what your intentions are. And also, when it is safe to do so, very, very important, don't try and do things if you're under duress or it would aggravate the people who have decided to come into your store to commit crime. Press your panic alarm and alert the police, or call the police, however your system works. And of course, once they've departed, many of these things take far less than a minute, thankfully. Check on your colleagues, members of the public, and please preserve the scene. I'm very, very keen as an ex-police officer that the police turning up to your store as much as possible is untouched. So we've got every chance to catch these criminals and strengthen the industry.
I think I'm managing my slides a bit better now. Hang on. You said. So, Simon, are you happy that we move on to Dan now? So, yeah, Dan, the floor is yours. I will warn you all, Dan is very, very passionate. So, Dan, we're giving you half an hour. So, over to you.
Okay, thank you. So, the aims and objectives for me is to promote a mental health awareness as we return to work for employers and for the employees. And identify any areas that I can help support people in. And then to try and put in place some short, medium and long-term strategies so that your business can become a mental health aware business. And that's important as we go forward. The mental health was talked a lot prior to COVID-19. It's been talked a lot about why we've been on lockdown, but it's necessary now that we take that through to the next step and we make sure that the long-term strategies are there to make sure mental health awareness is given to all employees so they know where they can go if they're struggling. We can create open environments for people. And it's safe. We should be talking about mental health. We should be. We talk about physical health. We don't talk about mental health. So it brings us nicely into when we talk about mental health, people automatically, alarm bells start ringing. We mentioned the word mental health and these alarm bells go off. But it's mental health versus mental illness. So everybody has got mental health on a daily basis. We have it as much as we have physical health. What we look at is we say when somebody is having some issues, it's mental health issues that they're having. So they become mentally ill, and that can be prolonged. It could be a short term, but we've got to find ways of supporting and educating and coping strategies and mechanisms that come into it, learning your triggers. There's loads of bits around that, but mental health, we've just got to be aware that mental health is something that we all possess. It's when it becomes a mental ill. And I talk about some terminology as well, because I know that people worry about what they say. Is that going to tip somebody over if they're struggling? And that's why we shy away from these conversations. So I never really would suggest saying that somebody's got mental health problems, because if you say that somebody's got mental health problems, that would suggest to an employer, a colleague, or anybody else that it is a problem, and it's not a problem. Then there's mental illness or a mental issue is more accurate terms, because they are things that you can work with, and they're things that we can use. There's CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy. There's just having supportive conversations. But the terminology around mental health problem for me sets alarm bells ringing to employers, and we've got to get away from that. But we've got to understand that there is a difference between mental health and mental illness. So if we go on to the next slide. So this, for me, is the big thing for people understanding. It's the mental health continuum. So we look at mental health, it's a fluid sliding scale on a daily basis. It's not something that just happens. So seem to be...
Sorry.
That's all right. That's all right.
There you go.
Yay. So the special effects will work. So where the dot has just come up, for me, that is absolute perfection. That's where everybody would want to be. Let me put it, there is nobody that lives in that quadrant. That is optimum, excellent mental health, and no mental health disorders at all. Nobody really lives there. We all, from a daily basis, you hear the term, "Oh, I got out of bed the wrong side." So we slide around this scale. So an example of this is a student. He's at home living with his parents, never had any issues socially or work-wise, lives in that quadrant there somewhere, and then goes off to uni, and he's got no job, no friends there, and he starts to slide down into the right quadrant. So he doesn't go off and see a doctor, he doesn't talk to anyone, he feels himself slowly dropping into that part. And we all know, and we should all be reflecting on our mental health. I like to do it on a weekly basis, just ask myself, how is my mental health? How am I doing? Am I okay? What's changed in my life that could have changed my mental health? So he drops to there, but then he goes off and he gets a job. He starts his classes, he makes some friends, his social life starts picking up, and he sees his mental health return back up to that right-hand quadrant. So he goes back to there and he lives in that bit again, and he's happy. But then we move on to another case study where you've got someone suffering with postnatal depression. So the baby comes along and they find their mental health is dropping down again into there. They just notice it. And you will notice these things. If you really reflect on stuff, you will notice how your mental health changes, how you feel within yourself, how you interact with people, how you suffer aches and pains as your body tells you you are struggling. So they go along to the doctor, and the doctor diagnoses them with postnatal depression. So they end up in that bottom left-hand quadrant. So they've been diagnosed, their mental health is poor at this time, and they are experiencing mental health issues. So the GP can signpost them to some counselling, to classes for new mums, or can prescribe them medication. But then they move up into the left-hand quadrant because they've been diagnosed. But as they take the medication, it puts them up into that left-hand corner. So they know that they have got some mental health issues, but they are using medication, they're using coping mechanisms, they're using counselling, they're talking to friends, family, and they bring their mental health back up. So there is no blocker for them to be moving back across into that right-hand quadrant. They may stop taking medication, they may stop going to counselling. The one thing that does stop is stigma. Stigma will stop that move across to the right-hand side. And we challenge stigma, and stigma always is there. You've got self-stigma. You fear what other people are going to think about you. You fear what they're going to think about your diagnosis. You fear about talking about it. And then the stigmas are there from other people who perceive how you would be if you've got depression and anxiety. I know, for example, schizophrenia. If anybody said that they've got schizophrenia, I know that the perception of that is that they're suddenly going to become violent, unpredictable, and maybe hurt someone. But there is a lot of stated cases that people suffering with schizophrenia are more likely to be a vulnerable victim of crime than they are to be the perpetrator. So that stigma stops people from moving back across. And this is where challenging that stigma comes in. And the whole thing about mental health for me is getting that message out there that we talk openly and we challenge stigma, and we understand that our mental health fluctuates from day to day. We can control certain aspects of it and we can own it. and we can take ownership of it. Myself, I never used to talk about my mental health at all. I used to be the typical man in a police force, in a male-dominated environment, did not want to seem vulnerable or weak by talking about it. And when I attempted suicide in March 2018, I don't think anybody saw it coming. Certainly not people that knew me. Even close friends didn't see it coming, because I managed to put a mask over how I was feeling and how I was acting. I used to take on more work and come over extra happy. And I used to be smiling, joking, laughing. I never used to show my feelings. I used to bottle them up and save them. And it culminated in my attempted suicide. From that, I reflected, and I've learned to talk about what happened and what happened leading up to it. I took part in counselling, and some of it works for me, some of it doesn't. Different therapies work for me. I must say, for me, cognitive behavioural therapy wasn't very good for me, but I know other people that absolutely swear by it. Glad I tried it, and I would suggest to anybody that they should try different types of therapies, because one, it's the same as anybody's brain. Your brain's individual, and what breaks my brain might not break somebody else's. The same as what fixes my brain might not fix everybody else's. But challenging this stigma, we talk openly about mental health, creating that safe, supportive environment to be able to talk about it. And then I found a lot, for me, educating myself, learning my triggers, learning about different parts of the brain, learning about mental health, learning about fight and flight, and why I react in certain ways. That's really helped me. And that's where, for me as well, training for employees helps, because having that little bit of knowledge about how your brain works and how you will perceive different scenarios, and it's completely normal to do something differently to your colleague, and to experience it differently to your colleague, and it affects you differently to how it does. But if you can talk about it and not be scared of any stigmas, any remunerations, or anything to come from that, from when you're saying stuff in the workplace, people do worry that they're going to say the wrong thing, somebody's going to take it the wrong way, and then they get persecuted for it, and the stigmas build up. But we've got to make sure that we can be safe talking about it, and that we know what we're talking about, and we're educated, and we know how to speak to each other. And that comes into being conscious of what language we use. I have been told in the past that I should just get over it, and it's really not that bad. And at the height of my depression, I must admit that those things just, it broke all bridges. The rapport was no longer there with those people. And I lost people that I felt that I could talk to. So that language that you use, the terminology that we use, and it goes back to when I said earlier about using mental health problems, it creates a barrier. So we've got to be conscious of that language, making sure that we are openly listening, open questions, and not using terminology that could break that barrier down. And then we encourage that physical and mental health are both as important as each other. There have been studies into mental health around the debilitating effects that different conditions can have. And they compare depression can be as bad as having a stroke, for you not wanting to interact. So the impacts it has on your life, they compare to that of having a stroke. So that there is that link that we've got to start saying, you know, mental health really does matter, and it is as important as physical health. We go to the gym to protect our physical health. We need to be doing stuff to protect our mental health and our mental well-being. And that needs to be transferred into the workplace as well. We always know if someone's got a physical injury, a back injury, a broken leg, we can see that, which makes it easier for us to deal with. If somebody's got an invisible illness, we really struggle. And that's been the same for a long time, and we've got to start breaking that. And then it's empowering people and showing the compassion. There's too many times where I've felt very shamed by the fact that I've admitted that I've got a mental illness in the workplace. I feel that people are talking about it a lot more, and we've got to get over that. We've got to challenge that. We've got to be honest, and we've got to challenge when people are being treated like that in the workplace. And we do that by openly talking about it. And it's that cycle that comes back round, and being honest with the rest of the team. So if you have a member of staff that is struggling with mental illness and you do talk to them about it and they are very open, then be open with the rest of the team as much as confidentiality will allow. Be open with what you're doing to support that person, because it breeds that environment of safety and positivity towards mental health awareness and mental illness. So if we can just move on. Yeah. So supportive conversation for me is massively important, because like I said before, nobody wants to talk about it. We've shied away from it for so long. And some of the stats that I've looked at, that even with mental health awareness, which is getting better, which is brilliant, some employees are finding that their employer still has this stigma around that they're going to be an issue in the workplace if they've got a mental illness. So we've got to start moving away from that. And I throw these little stats in there that around 10 million people will experience a mental health issue each year in the UK. That's massive for a workforce. And the fact that, we don't feel confident about open up to it. And have our line managers got the training to be able to speak to the staff and signpost them in the right directions? Because somebody who might want to talk about their mental health issues will approach a line manager. If that skill isn't there, then that all goes away and they might not ever open up again. So learning these skills and having a supportive conversation, it is a skill, and listening is a skill. So what I always say is when you're going to have a supportive conversation, make sure you set aside the time to be able to do it, because the last thing you want to do is be able to cut it short and say, really sorry, I've got to go because I've got another meeting, because that person might not want to ever talk to anyone again. You might shut that down. So making sure you've got the time, and then picking the right venue. If you're in a place where they don't feel like talking, because if someone overhears them and they fear any repercussions from that, they might not talk, they might not open up. So look at some neutral venues, going for a walk together, having that talk there. I know that we've got social distancing. It makes it very hard to have these conversations, but as much as possible, we need to make that environment really positive so we can do it. Open questions. Body language has got to be open, because you close your body language off, they will shut off. Non-confrontational, non-judgmental, because as soon as anyone feels that they're being judged, again, we shut that down. And this might be the only chance you have of having this conversation with someone that could save their life. So you've got to take this opportunity to be able to listen. Let them talk. If you ask them a question, let them talk till they've got nothing to say. Even if it goes silent for a few seconds, don't feel awkward in that silence. Leave it, because they may just be gathering their train of thought again to go on to something else. And if you interrupt or try and finish a sentence for them or put something else in, again, they lose that train of thought. They might shut the conversation down. And that's the only chance you're going to get to save this one person's life. There are a lot of people that say, if you talk about suicide, or you're planning you plan a suicide, and if you talk about it, that you're not going to actually do it. That's a myth. That people who don't talk about it and people that talk about it, they still go ahead with their plans, no matter if they are vocal or not. So don't take that thing that, they've spoken about committing suicide. Don't take that as they're not going to do it because they've been speaking about it too much. That may be their cry for help, that they're talking about it. It's not unusual to have suicidal thoughts, or when you're in that frame of mind, and it's not unusual for someone to plan their suicide. I planned my suicide for about 10 months, and I subconsciously ended up bulk buying paracetamol every time I went to a store of any type. If they sold paracetamol, I found myself having to buy it. So my suicide plan was there for ages, and I never wanted to act out on it. So maybe if I'd spoken out then, I may have sought help, and I may have never gone down the path of actually going through with my plan. But that plan kept me feeling safe. But giving someone the chance to talk about it could save someone's life. So we give that empathy, that sympathy when they need it. And it comes back to terminology. If you start saying to people, just cheer up, you've got so much to live for, why would you even consider this? That's enough to end that conversation. That would be enough for me to zone out and not want to talk. So it is important how we approach the conversations, and it is like I say, it is a skill that we need to develop, and training around that is massively important, because you can never, by not saying anything, you're doing a disservice, because just by talking, you won't say the wrong thing. Just, you've got to try. So, and that's for me, it's massive. So asking the right questions: how are you feeling? Are you okay? It's a nice way to start it. Are you okay? And generally, are you okay? And the thing I like about getting my message out there about mental health is that mental health is something that we all have to look after our well-being. But mental health awareness is learning about your colleagues, your friends, your family, and how they are and what they're struggling. And this is, so I always like the fact when you do a mental health awareness session that you have a lot of people, because different experiences all play into mental health awareness. And you might learn something about someone that could end up saving their life, because you could say, oh, actually, I know that John acts this way when he's feeling a little bit depressed. So, John, are you okay? And you might approach that supportive conversation because you've noticed something in their behavior. And then you go through, what can I do to support you? Is there anybody we can call? Is there anybody that comes stay with you? Is there any friends and family? Is there a cousin, a sister, a brother? How close are you to your parents? Those sort of things, asking who they've got as a supportive network, because a supportive network is massive as well. Knowing who you can go and talk to, having someone you trust to go and talk to as well. At times of crisis, supportive conversation can save a life. Leading up and prepping, learning how to have those conversations, for me, is just such a big thing. So, and we forget that there is already, although the government haven't made mental health awareness and mental health first aiders mandatory in the workplace, I think it will come in the fullness of time. Certainly, if we're saying that physical health and mental health should be going hand in hand, and we should be looking after them the same way, we have 1 in 10 physical first aiders in the workplace. So why are we not doing the same with mental health first aiders? Especially with the strains of life now as it is, pre-COVID and post-COVID, the COVID's not going away, and we're going to have to live in this world where we could be exposed to it. We could contract it, and unfortunately people will still die of it until we come to a position where there is a vaccine. So we have to live with that and how it plays out in our mental health and our well-being. But employers do have a duty of care. Under the management of health and safety at work, they've also got, under the Equality Act 2010, we've got this duty of care to put reasonable adjustments in place. So what do we class as reasonable adjustments? We're looking at training. That's a massive reasonable adjustment. If we trained our staff in how to look after their well-being, but there is that duty of care that's there for employers to look at it. And I've spoken about the fact that in my generation in the police force, and I know Simon agrees, and we've spoken about it before, that we had a lot of diversity training, because the generation we grew up in, our culture wasn't as diverse as it is now. But I know my children don't have the same training. It doesn't happen. And I think it will be the same as we go forward with mental health awareness, because we get to that point where we are set up as businesses, as individuals, as families, as people, to look after our own well-being. So that this will go as we go forward, and that can only be a good thing, that everybody is mentally health aware. So, but we do have to protect ourselves from discrimination in the workplace. I feel that carrying out risk assessments, things that can cause stresses in the workplace, that's a great thing for employers to be doing, and to reach out and speak to their staff and just have these conversations, especially as we prepare to go back. Are we talking to employees? What are their concerns? I've just thrown a few statistics in there. 1 in 4 people will experience mental health issue at some point in their life. And that feeds very much into the mental health continuum, to say that, we may not be diagnosed, you might self-diagnose because you know how you feel on a daily basis. But if you are suffering for more than 2 weeks with depression, then you should visit your GP, and they will put you in the right places, signposting you to the right places, signposting you to counselling. The NHS run a great service, Talking Change, which is free, and they offer different types of therapies. which can be really helpful. But 1 in 4, that's massive. And then you look at the fact that 75% of all mental health problems are established before someone is 18. So for me, you take 4 people who have suffered with mental health and put them in a room, 2.5 to 3 of those will have had issues with their mental health before they were 18 years old, whether that was a divorce, whether it was a violent incident, whether it was an assault, something that then lays dormant in their brain until something triggers them in adult life. And at the moment, the costs of mental health is costing the UK over 100 billion. That is a massive amount of money that's going. But what we don't see as well is that we're having lots of presenteeism in the workplace, which can never be attributed to any sort of cost, because you've got somebody in the workplace that's masking their mental health, and you will never see it. There'll be signs, but their presenteeism, you can't judge that by somebody being there, but they're actually not there, if that makes sense. They're not fulfilling their role. And we end up maybe managing people out of positions within businesses because they are struggling with their mental health, but they've not spoken about it. They're always present, so you're not looking at any absenteeism. So there's no signs that their health is deteriorating. But actually, they're really struggling as an individual, and we need to pick up on those as well. And it's the largest cause of disability in the UK. I feel as we go forward in this return to work, there's going to be a lot of things that we need to put in place to help people cope as we go back. We are going to be looking at, if we just return to a business as usual, we are going to be looking at people suffering with mental health issues, particularly fatigue, burnout, which will manifest physically and mentally. We've got to look at that. Can we do a phased return? Well, the way the government are furloughing staff and keeping the furlough on after August, it provides an excellent opportunity to have a phased return, to allow people to build their stamina back up so that we don't have this fatigue. But other coping strategies, mine always used to be the gym, or socializing with friends. They've all been taken away from me at the moment, so I'm having to find other ways to cope. So will other people, and we need to look at those. What are your coping strategies? What makes you feel good? That's what you need to be looking at. What makes you feel good on a daily basis? What can I do? So listen to a bit of music, do a bit of reading, anything that switches your brain off for a little while and makes you feel positive. It gives you some perspective on what's going on. And they're the things we've got to look at as we return back into the workplace.
Dan, that's brilliant. Thank you. Before we move on to some actions, I just want to say how much this personally resonates with me. I have to be honest and say I have suffered from depression and mental health and anxiety for many years, and it's been like a dirty secret that I hoped nobody would ever know or never realise, because I felt such a failure by having this. The one good thing is I hope it's made me a better person, because I find as an employer, I hope it's made me more aware to spot it in other people. And certainly when I was recruiting, and I'm sure other business owners will see this, more and more people that are coming through are displaying these issues. And I've tried to make it safe with people around me to be able to talk about this. But thank you, I've learned so much, not just today, but in the whole process of working with you both on this. And if we achieve nothing but to move on from the stigma and say, let's talk, then I think we've done a great job. But I've personally as well been overwhelmed by the questions and with feedback we've had. I think everybody's feeling the same way, and now it's time to be able to offer some resources to other people. So on both subjects, shall we look at what we can do to go forward? Simon, first of all, what are you thinking of as what we need to do at this moment?
Well, if I can use you as an example, Helen, and you and Phil going in your store and doing an assessment was the best thing that I've heard. I think getting in there and having a proper look round, check the bits that I mentioned earlier, for those of you who made some notes around it, make sure everything's up and running, and that imagine you were turning the key to open the door the next day. Have you got everything in place? We've got huge amounts of stuff in our heads at the moment. It's so unknown, the territory that we're walking into. Will you get a load of customers? Will you not? Will people come through the door wearing masks? What will they want from you? How will things work out? And I think it's really, really important that we've got so much in our head at the moment that we do take a few minutes, just in silence necessarily, just in our store, thinking, right, when I open tomorrow, do this thing, and are we ready? Have we got everything in place? Just check, really, really important that we just walk through and talk through our security with our staff before they come back in, inform them of any changes, hit the ground running, because then you can focus on your sales and being safe, and then put everything behind you and at the back of your mind, focus on your business, but you've got that preparation. I think the key thing is preparation here and vigilance. I remain worried about how it would be if a store has to act upon an active COVID-19 risk case. But it's worst case scenario, but please factor it into your thoughts. I think start off strong. You can always reduce things later on. And if you've got policies and procedures in place.
And then, you know, if we're faced with that,
yeah,
sorry, Simon. So if we're faced with that, and we don't know what to do, they can pick up the phone to you, can't they? Or, you know, if they can't find you, NAJ will direct them to you, and you know, you will be there, because you might not be able to process that at the moment. But I mean, I was just thinking as well, it'd be really great to pick up the phone to the team and say, look, this is what we're working on. By the way, just to let you know, before you come back, this is what we're thinking. By the way, what are your thoughts? What are your concerns? What are we going to do to alleviate those? So, because really, I think that's what you're saying, Dan, isn't it? Let's pick up the phone, let's Zoom them, let's speak to our team and check how they are.
Yeah, I think the time is now to prepare. I think that knowing what anxieties your staff have got makes it easier for you to prepare. I think that it would be remiss to miss this opportunity of being able to prepare to go back, because the worst thing you would want is to go back and suddenly your staff start identifying their anxieties and concerns. Then it's too late. This is your chance now to speak. And Zoom, we've got the technology to Zoom. I feel that email is probably a bit too impersonal for this conversation, but I definitely think you pick up the phone or set up a Zoom meeting so you can talk to each other, because being able to see body language for me is one of the biggest things, considering it's the main part of our communication methods. So yeah, if it's not something you've ever done before as an employer, yeah, it's probably going to be out of the blue. Will you get the right? Will you hit the right tone? Will you get the right responses? I don't know, but you're not going to burn any bridges by trying.
Yeah. I mean, I think you're right. I mean, one thing I was sort of laughing at is Ainsworth Jewellers. It's never really the philosophy to be so open and to talk so much. But what I'm hoping is something that I've done in a previous webinar, which was about having conversations with your staff in terms of coaching. It's called the motivational analysis. That's a way to start a professional conversation. So maybe if you feel more comfortable, you could start asking professional questions, because then ask for opinions as well. And then that could morph onto mental health, because I'm sure some employees will be thinking, whoa, what's brought this on? And having the confidence to give honest feedback is always a challenge. But you talk about confidence. I'd just like to raise, Gary Lane, who has put on the chat here, having been through counselling myself after many years after death of my mum, I can only say it's the best thing I've ever done. Just talking and identifying my triggers has helped me so much, and I use these techniques to this day. Thank you for shining a light on this taboo subject. So, you look at Gary and how well equipped he is, and look what the hurt he's been through, but look at the things he's putting in place to make that work. And I think that's so powerful. Thank you, Gary, for taking the time to put that on the chat. We've got a few more minutes, so please, if you've got some other questions, please do ask. Dan, I've got one for you from a previous question as well. Somebody's asking how to have the conversations about furlough. You alluded to it before, but how might people be feeling coming back from furlough?
Well, I know that after any sort of layoff, an amount of time that we've had, the anxieties are going to be there no matter what. And the only way you can do it is have this conversation with them and try to alleviate some of the fears. Building confidence in your with your employees by having policies and procedures in place. That's the best way to show that you are going to be committed to looking after their well-being, knowing that they've got some signposting to where they can go if they're struggling, knowing that their line managers have been trained to be able to have these supportive conversations. That all starts to alleviate these fears. They're all parts of reasonable adjustments. But we've got to set the groundwork down is by knowing what these fears are, so you can start working with them. And there's loads of benefits to being mentally health aware in the workplace. The fact that it reduces absenteeism, it reduces grievances and discrimination claims. There's lots of bits that go hand in hand with it that we've got to start having these conversations for. But you can't fix a problem if you don't know it's there. But what you can do is have policies and procedures in place for when it arises, that you've got an idea of where the staff are going to go. You've got if you've got an organisation that has Hock Health, if you know your local charities that provide counselling, such as the NHS Talking Change that I said, there are a lot of other charities that do stuff locally. They may be a national charity, but locally they provide different support. And you can get in touch with them and they can refer you to different groups. The doctors will also have a good idea of where you can go. So the GP is always good. And when we're having these supportive conversations, in a time of crisis, we've got to look at what's going on with the person, the individual. So we assess that, and then we approach and try to assist. And we try to listen and communicate with them and not be judgmental, give them as much support and info as we can, and encourage that person to seek professional help. They might not want to. And it's the hardest thing to do is to point out that somebody might need to go and see their doctor if they don't want to.
As well, sort of at the moment, we've all been trying to support each other, but I think the message is it's okay not to be okay. Given what's gone on in this world, this is huge, and this has been so changing and so big for so many people. And you know, I know very close loved ones for who this has had a profound impact on them. And they're strong people, they're wonderful people. There's nothing wrong. This is just really, you know, been so enormous. And I think one thing that really resonated with me was be kind to other people, but be kind to yourself as well. We came up with a phrase, didn't we, yesterday, be kind to your mind, because I think we all have to forgive ourselves for finding this a challenging time.
Yeah, I think that probably lockdown caught a lot of people. And I think that there will be some people that have experienced mental health issues that have never had anything like that before because of the situation we find ourselves in. Now, some people will return to work and that will alleviate them. And some will find coping strategies, learn their triggers, and that will alleviate them. But some may have to live with mental health issues for the foreseeable. And they may have to have support of friends, family, colleagues, employers, GP. And we've got to understand that the situation we're living in, and it is very difficult, and it's unprecedented. It's unprecedented times, and it's a scary world that we're going back into.
Yeah.
But there are things we can do.
Well, Craig Skinner's come up with a great one. I love this. Be careful with sales targets at the start. Add some fun challenges. I mean, what a brilliant point is that? How many retailers are going to think about recuperating their lost earnings and maybe putting pressure on the sales professionals? So that is brilliant. I personally have always found that if you stop worrying about the sales targets but concentrate on that customer in front of you, the sale happens anyway. So, but you know, don't compromise the experience. But I think that's brilliant advice. You know, make sure that people don't risk taking risks and cutting corners on personal safety. I think that's really fantastic. Reiterate again, what's the most important thing? There's nothing more precious than the people that you work with, not making the sales and not making the stock. So it's great advice.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. I think when you know in a time of crisis, if someone's struggling, workload and removing as many stressors as you can is very, very important. And as we go back, it will be the same. And we can look at that. And that will play into sort of a longer term strategy where you risk assess the workplace and stresses there are. And different people will have different stresses. That's why keeping in touch with employees is massive, to knowing what the stresses are in the workplace and what they are having difficulties with. It may be something as simple in an office environment of the fact that there's a light that's been flickering on and off for the last 2 weeks, and that could really play and trigger somebody. And it's as simple as changing a bulb. And it's very right, and Craig's right, that you've got to look at these things as people are going back, because they stress. It does add stress to people's days.
Yeah, so you've given us some great tools, so thank you very much. And I think this is just very much the start of a dialogue. Judith, the most honest and open and interesting webinar I've been on in all of these weeks. How wonderful. Well done, and thank you. So Judith, thank you so much for your support. I think, as I say, let's make this the beginning of something, and think about the duty of care we've got to all the people that we can connect with out there. So Simon, you've put your contact email up, so I think we're encouraging lots more conversations, lots more dialogue, lots more questions, and with the potential, you're doing another webinar, I believe, which is global. Is that right, Simon?
Yeah, Dan will be on that one actually. Julie Outlook. David Bruff has asked Dan to join him, and forgive me, I don't know the full name. Iris Vander, the lady is the head of the World Jewellery Council. So Friday the 22nd, very topical. The 18th of May, the week following in the UK, is Mental Health Week. Dan's a very busy boy that week and has a lot of work to do, but he'll be doing something online with David, which he'll publicise nearer the time, which again will be really powerful, I think.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Well, gentlemen, thank you for the honour of working with you, and thank you to everybody that's been on this and some great feedback. And yeah, I think it's onwards and upwards for this. Let's make a change. Let's make it better. I think it's something.
Can I just throw something out there to everybody that has tuned in? I'm quite happy as a mental health first aider. If anybody feels that they would like to talk to me, I'm quite happy to offer that support to anybody that's watched this morning. Anybody that wants to talk about any of their concerns, anxieties, anything, I'm always on hand. I'm quite happy to give up my time to do that. So I'd like to throw that out and carry on getting this mental health awareness message out.
That's wonderful, Dan. I think you deserve the last word. Thank you very much, both of you, and we'll see you all very soon. Take care, everybody. Bye-bye.
Bye.